All right, welcome back, everyone. Principals and agents. Well, we have different words for the principal. Sometimes we call them the principal, but usually we call them something else, like the owner. Sometimes the investor. We have to remember that shareholders are a type of principal, even shareholders of public corporations that aren't in the room, so to speak. Sometimes we call them a capitalist. On the other hand, our agents are going to be our employee, our officer, our director. So if you are the investor or the owner, how do you protect yourself from your agents behaving badly? And you have two major choices. You can monitor them, right? You get that security camera up there, and you watch it from time to time, making sure they're not taking money out the till, or you have an alarm that goes off when a suspicious transaction occurs. And you have to fire them when they do something wrong. You have to come and say, you weren't doing enough work. You were sleeping in too much. You're fired. You don't rise to the level of an employee at this organization. Now, the problem with both of these things is that they're costly. This is the watcher problem, right? First off, you're going to put a camera and watch the till. Well, someone's got to watch the camera. Are you going to do it, Brett? You're the boss, right? You're going to sit there and watch the camera watching the till? You've got better things to do with your time. Are you going to hire somebody to watch the camera watching the till? But then you're going to hire someone to watch the guy who's watching the camera watching the till? Then you hire a guy who's going to watch the guy who's watching the guy who's watching the camera that's watching the till? Right? All this causes cost, and we can't get it perfectly right. Sometimes with computers, technology, we can have better systems, but monitoring costs money. Discipline costs money too. You know? Brett calls me into his office. What did I do, Brett? Well, Professor Orenberg, you didn't teach a very good class again today. You're fired. Now what does Brett have to do? He's going to have to find someone to teach this class. I got to tell you, I was on the hiring committee last year. It's not easy, thankfully for me. It's hard to replace an employee. For any of you who have worked in a job, it takes money and effort to train somebody. It's true of associates in a law firm. Associates in a big law firm can lose money for the first couple of years while they get up to speed. They become the most valuable at around their 5th year. So to keep in mind, by the way, if you get there and you want to negotiate for a little. Right? It's a holdout problem. So firing someone costs money. You have to take the time to discipline. And because of the state of our labor laws, as I'll be talking about on the 25th and on the 1st, it can be very risky to fire someone in today's environment. If you fire someone, you're at risk for a number of different actions. Some of them are legitimate, some of them are not legitimate. But if you fire somebody, they can sue you on a number of bases, groundless or otherwise. So that's a risk that you take when you discipline somebody. And those are costs that you have to add to your business model. Fortunately, the law of agency is designed to help that a bit. And we're going to go into detail on all of these, but we have 4 duties of loyalty and 6 duties of performance that agents will owe to their principals in law, and this is under common law, not statute, but under common law. First, there's the duty not to acquire a material benefit from a third party in a connection with a transaction conducted on behalf of a principal. What does that mean? I gave an example of this earlier. I'm going to come back to you, Brett. What's an example of a third party transaction where an agent could potentially take a material benefit?
So basically, if you're entering into a contract with a supplier and they're giving you a trip to somewhere.
Great. Kickback. Yeah. So D comes over to my house to look at the pipes and says, we don't really have time on the schedule and your basement's filling up with water. But for $100, I could probably move some things around. Right? So that's an issue. That's an issue you have to fight against. And yes, the restatement says there's a duty of an agent not to acquire material benefit from a third party in connection with a transaction conducted on behalf of a principal. Kickbacks, bribes, not okay. Duty not to deal with principal on behalf of adverse party in connection with an agency relationship. So if I decide that I'm going to sue the contractor for fixing the pipes wrong, his foreman can't come and help me out, right? He has a duty not to give material information. He can't roll on his boss to save his own neck. A duty to refrain from competing during the relationship, right? So if you are working for someone and you are an agent of them, you can't go and you have your own shop. You certainly can't steal their projects, and you can't have your own shop, and you cannot use their information for your own purposes. So what kind of information might you get? Let's say you are D, as I'm calling him, right? And you are a project manager for A construction company. What kind of property or confidential information might you have access to? Yeah.
Customer lists?
Customer lists are the big one. Customer list is the big one. Can you tell us what, maybe not everyone is familiar with that. What does that mean, a customer list?
That would be everybody that has used that service or needed that service.
Everyone that used that service or needed that service, right? So there was a case in the 1960s. Home cleaning was not a thing back then. Believe it or not, people used to clean their own homes. Some of us still do. So maid service really came into its own in the 1960s with the advent of the electric vacuum and the proliferation of motor vehicles, particularly vans that could transport it. The problem is if you were going to go as a maid service and try to create new business, you would have to figure out who would hire a maid. Now again, you go to a block, you go to a street, not everyone's going to want that service. And in business, there's something called customer acquisition cost. That's how much it costs you to get your customer. So if you, the owner, are going door to door, knocking, Mr. A, would you like maid service? Slam in my face. Mr. B, would you like maid service? Mr. C, would you like, oh yeah, I would definitely like maid service. My wife just became ill. I need to have someone help out around the house. Now that's valuable. That time that you just spent figuring out that A and B are not interested and C is interested, that's value. And that customer list saying C is good, A and B are out has value. Now in the case of my contracting company, what other property or confidential information might you have access to? Tools, right? In addition to the customer list, he's got a truck full of tools. I don't know exactly what it costs, but I know that he keeps it locked up. So it must be worth something. I mean, circular saws and, various fasteners. And I mean, some of these little plumbing, as I learned, right? These plumbing fittings can be, little guy can be $50. So you got a truck full of this stuff. That's valuable. And is he keeping track of how many L-shaped shark bite whatchamadoodles they've got? No. He's probably not. He's probably trusting his agent to do that. Right? So could he grab one and put it in his own house? Yes, he could. Could he get one and use it for a job and therefore have a lower cost basis, be able to do the job for $20 instead of $70 because he stole the $50 part? Yes, he could. So confidential information, particularly customer lists, tools, supplies, cannot be used. So those are duties of, by the way, these are then duties of loyalty. Now, duties of loyalty are distinguished from duties of performance. So these are all breaches of loyalty. If you do any of these things, you're being disloyal. That's at least categorically speaking. And duties of loyalty are, in a sense, higher duties. There's no good reason to breach them. And so in general, there'll be a stricter application of law to duties of loyalty. Now looking at duties of performance, we first have a duty to act in accord with express and implied terms of the contract. What does that mean? Well, implied terms are harder. So I'm teaching implied terms over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks in Contracts 2 that you all took, and you probably covered implied terms in your contract interpretation section. What is an implied term? It's not always clear what's an implied term. The contract may say, hiring Drew to be project manager and to spec jobs and to take bids. Does that mean you need to get up at 6 in the morning to do it? Does it mean you have to work till 9 o'clock at night? Does it mean you have to drive your own vehicle? Does it mean you have to provide your own cell phone? Does it mean you have to take customer calls at 9 o'clock at night on your home phone? Or respond to text messages? Or answer email on Sundays? It's not entirely clear what those implied terms are. So saying there's a duty to accord with it gets a little complicated. It's a fact-specific inquiry. The same kind of inquiry you take when interpreting a contract. But there is a duty to accord with those terms. A duty to act with reasonable care. Duty to act with reasonable care. Now again, fact-specific. What does it mean, reasonable care? Depends on the circumstances. And as you'll see, again, these duties of performance, they're a little fuzzier. They're a little harder to pin down than the duties of loyalty, where there's just no good reason to breach them. Whereas on the other hand, you might say, what is reasonable care? What is an implied term? Does Drew have to get up at 9 o'clock at night to come into the office? Well, in the case of a law firm, probably yes. In the case of someone earning $40,000 as a legal secretary, probably no. How do we make that distinction? Well, again, facts and circumstances, what a reasonable people would expect entering into the contract, what the parties' subjective intentions were entering into the contract, what the contract said. what's, the contract interpretation steps. A duty to act only within the scope of the actual authority. So the agent cannot exceed their mandate. Yeah. Drew, you're the project manager. Go to Professor Orenberg's house and fix the leaking pipes. Right? Are you authorized to go to the house and agree to redo my roof for $10,000? Probably not. Probably not. Almost certainly not. Duty to act within the scope of actual authority. Only what I said you can do. Again, this gets complicated when it comes to directors. They're given a broad mandate. So their actual authority might be quite different. We might have different expectations. But we're starting with the foundation in the restatement of agency third. All right. Duty to comply with all the principal's lawful instructions. Right? So again, Drew, the project manager, right? So I tell you, go and beat up Professor Orenberg. He hasn't paid my bill. There isn't a duty to abide by that, but you're supposed to comply with all of the instructions. Don't fix the leak. Right? Professor Orenberg hasn't paid me. Don't shut his water valve off. This might get complicated, right? So this is a complicated duty. On the one hand, Drew might be committing a tort. Or, for that matter, certainly violating what he might feel is a moral duty. Here's a guy in my house, and his boss is saying, don't fix the leak. What's he going to do? Well, he has a duty to comply with those lawful instructions. He has an agency duty. He might be personally liable for failing to make that concession to his boss. On the other hand, he might feel a moral obligation. So these areas get complicated when someone has a conflict. But that is a duty in the law, a duty to act reasonably and to refrain from conduct likely to damage the principal's enterprise. Right? So don't go on Yelp and say your boss is a big doo-doo head. This gets more complicated as well. Have you ever heard of Glassdoor? Glassdoor is a website you can go to see what it's like to work at a company. So you have a lot of employees who are disparaging their company. Is that likely to damage the enterprise? Yes, it is. On the other hand, people have a right to free speech. Another area that gets complicated. So like I said, the topics, and a duty to inform principle of known material facts. We'll get that when we get to imputation. But as I said, on the left hand of the ledger, on your left, and I guess on my left, looking at the screen, on the ledger talking about duties of loyalty, these are sort of intuitive. Don't screw over your boss. Don't take what is his. He's paying you to do a job. You cannot take that opportunity to enrich yourself at his expense. Those are relatively simple. Duties of performance are much fuzzier, much harder. What is reasonable care? What is the scope of one's actual authority? What constitutes a lawful instruction that I don't have to abide by because it has some other conflict? So we have a number of cases. I taught a course, and maybe will again, on closely held businesses. We spend about a month covering these, so I hope you appreciate this is just a brief introduction, overview. But we have a lot of case law, and if you're interested, I have the case book, and we can talk through the cases that bear out each of these duties.